Welcome to the Summercast, a podcast aimed at making fundamentalism great again by applying confessional Baptist doctrine to all of life.
You know, people in Florida have hurricane parties whenever they're expecting imminent storm surges or whatever it is. And I decided to have a COVID-19 party. So what I did was I actually painted my wall with chalk paint and then, of course, began drawing on it. And I removed one of the pictures from the middle. It's over here. Probably going to take it to the office of the church. But anyway, that's what I did. And as you can see, I'm a pretty good artist. I'm pretty good. I'm almost as good as Peter Voth in these posters. No, not really. Not really. Not at all. Anyways, obviously, we're going to talk about what everybody else is talking about. We're going to copy what everybody else is doing because we're cool. They're cool, and we want to be cool too. So, no. What I wanted to do here is kind of do some damage control, because I think there's a lot of talking past one another, and it's causing a lot of unnecessary argumentation, a lot of unnecessary assumptions and things of that nature. And so what I want to do here is talk about two different political philosophies which dovetail with two different economic policies, or economic policies as well. So I think that'll be helpful. And we need to parse some issues. We need to parse some issues. We need to analyze the situation, and that's what I want to try to do here. The situation is bleak. I mean, if you are someone who enjoys your liberties, like me, as an American citizen, this situation's kind of bleak. Like it's a little bit discouraging, right, to say the least. And when I say a little bit, I'm purposefully being under dramatic there. It's really discouraging. The only reason I'm not discouraged, and the only reason I'm not despairing over it, is because of Christ. And something that has been on my mind for the last couple of days at least is Daniel 3 and Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. I wrote about that on my website. You can check it out below. You just visit that URL right there, and you'll see what I mean. Anyways, we as Christians, we should be most level-headed about this situation, right? We're dealing with men who, at worst, could kill the body, right? They could, at worst, kill the body. But we serve a God who is Lord over both body and soul. So we don't need to fear men, okay? Firstly. Secondly, okay, onto the business item of the day, which is the debate that's taking place online. Anytime a news story breaks, it doesn't matter what it's about, there's going to be a debate within Christian circles. It's just gonna, and if you're in the Reformed camp, if you're Calvinist, you're gonna see even more debate within Calvinistic circles about what happens, right, in the news and what's happening in our nation, and so on. And this is obviously no exception. This situation is of no exception, and we need to look at the situation with a level head. And I understand sometimes it's hard to do because we panic. We're losing jobs. We're losing money. We're asking ourselves. Some of us are asking ourselves whether or not we're going to be able to put food on the table in 3 weeks, 2 weeks. And so a lot of the concern is not overblown. It's actually legitimate. The panic is not legitimate. And the backbiting is not legitimate. So when I post something like, I'm not going to take a government handout if it so happens that the government does end up cutting $1,000 for each individual American citizen in the form of a check. The assumption there is I'm condemning everybody who does take the money, right? When when you come out and say something like, well, this or that is a government overreach. The fact that pastors are being jailed in Florida is a government overreach. You're having other Christians come out and say, no, it's totally legitimate because the government needs to be dealing with these issues. So you have a lot of angles popping up and a lot of people coming at this situation from different angles. And what I want to try to do here is simplify the discussion. I'm not going to end the debate. I want to try to simplify the debate, and I want to try to make both sides of the debate understandable one to the other, okay? So the first thing we need to look at is the difference between collectivism and individualism and the role that those two categories played in American history. I've already recorded this video once. I've already done a first take, and I've decided not to go with it. But what I did basically is I took the Canon camera, the nice camera, and I set it up to where I could, showing me drawing on the wall and everything. And I was trying to list out the difference between the Federalist Papers on the one hand and the Anti-Federalist Papers on the other. And, the Anti-Federalist Papers, they're arguing against the aristocracy, what they called the aristocracy, aristocratic government model. And the Federalist Papers are doing what the Anti-Federalist Papers would say is arguing for an aristocratic system, a centralized government, right? The Federalist Papers argue positively, strongly for a central government. Anti-Federalist Papers, not so much. And what you see in those two packages of documents are two different, not only political philosophies, but two different economic philosophies at play. You have the categories of collectivism and individualism have largely been used within the economical conversation to describe the dynamics of economy in any given society. So, for example, if you have a collectivist society, you are talking about a societal structure or an economical structure that sees the individual as nothing but a cog to contribute to the overall collective. And in an individualist society, which we've never really had, I mean, truthfully, in this country, we've never had a purely individualist society. In an individualist society, you have a society of people who are entering into collectives, but they're doing so voluntarily, right? Whereas in an actual collectivist society, you're seeing a forced collective, if you will, and all of the people that live in that society are not seen according to their individualism, but according to their value insofar as they are able to make the collective happen, if I can boil it down into very simple terminology. And if we could apply those terms to the Federalist and the Anti-Federalist Papers, we could say that in the 18th century, you had a debate between collectivists and individualists, right? The Federalist Papers, for example, are primarily concerned with the preservation of our union, which is a legitimate concern, by the way. That is not a stupid or immoral concern. The Anti-Federalist Papers, however, were concerned about the rights of the individual, and also the voice of authority. Is the voice of authority going to be the people, or is it going to be an aristocracy, a ruling class, which then undermines the ideal, the American ideal of a government for the people by the people, right? And so you have collectivism and individualism at play there. If you speed up to our current day, the same debate exists, and it has existed. It's never ceased to exist, right? It's been with us at least since the inception of this nation. And you could even trace it further back to Britain and the conflict between the House of Lords and the House and the Parliament, House of Commons. But in the American context, it's been with us since the very beginning because, again, we came out of a context where it was an aristocracy, right? It was kind of a weird mixture of monarchy and aristocracy because you had the House of Lords on the one hand with a great amount of authority. But you also had Parliament, right? You had the House of Commons, and so there's some democracy in there as well. But historically, the aristocracy had won out. It's not that way anymore, obviously. But this is the context that America came out of. A context of what they saw to be, what the Founding Fathers saw to be government overreach. The king had too much power, and Parliament had too much power. And so we came out of this context, this conflict, this already broiling political conflict that really could be summarized as a political and an economical discussion in character. But you speed up now, and that debate has never stopped. It's morphed, it's advanced, it's developed, but it's never ceased. And it hasn't totally changed to be something completely different. And now what you see, and something this COVID-19 thing is bringing out, whatever you want to call it, a pandemic, a government ploy, a coup d'etat, or whatever. What you're seeing is that divide become ever so sharp, right? It's becoming sharper than it has been in recent years. And so on the one hand, you're having Christians. And I want to bring this within the context of Christianity, obviously. You have Christians on the one hand who are saying the government needs to handle this. This is the government's responsibility, and we need to trust them to make a call. And we need to trust them to make the best call. And they'd invoke, passages like Romans 13, for example. We need to submit to the government. God has put government in place for our welfare, essentially, to punish evil and to take care of us. So you have a group of Christians that's taking that road. You have another group of Christians who are saying, well, we understand the role of government in the preservation of society, and the preservation, really fundamentally, of order. And so in the interest of the preservation of order, we can understand government wanting to take some precautionary measures. But as Christians, we shouldn't just submit to these edicts that are being issued at a cyclic rate without question. Not saying we shouldn't submit to them, but we shouldn't submit to them without question and without qualification. Okay, so you have cautious, somewhat skeptical Christians over here. Skeptical insofar as they don't know and they doubt whether or not government is really in it for our good, right? And I think that's a right question to be asking. Are they really doing this for our good? The track record of centralized government is that they're always self-interested. Okay, so I think there's a valid concern here. Christians who don't want to just submit without question, right? But then you have Christians over here, they're like, we need to let government take care of this. Now, there are valid talking points each of these groups have. And the reason for that is because it cannot be denied, unless you're in favor of anarchy, it cannot be denied that places like Romans 13 and our national documents would suggest that government has a responsibility to preserve order, at the very least. If you want to boil it down to a most basic understanding, the government has a responsibility to preserve order. And as Christians, we need to understand that, and we need to let them do that. We need to let them do their jobs. There are some pastors that are coming out and accusing government of saying, you're not letting me do my job as a pastor. Well, that may be true, but we need to have a reciprocal response as well. We need to let the government do their jobs. And it's biblically ordained that the government keep order and peace within the society that they govern, right? That being said, the group of Christians over here, the cautious people, the people who are like, really, I don't know if we should go along with this or not, have a valid concern. And the concern is this, if I could just lay this on the table. Is it really the case? And I want you to think about this critically and carefully. Is it really the case that the government can or should be able to forbid or suspend the right to assembly because of a news story like the COVID-19 pandemic? Is it the case that all the government needs to do is to have one variable, such as a virus, in order to not only shut down the country, but suspend the constitutional right to peaceful assembly? Ask yourselves that question. If all that needs to be done to revoke that right, which is very important, it's a very central right. It's a right at the very bedrock of the founding of this nation, the right to assembly. Right? Because coming out of England again, you're coming out of a situation in the 17th and 18th centuries where you couldn't just start a church, right? And in fact, John Bunyan was arrested twice for this very reason in the 17th century because he did not have a license from the Church of England to be preaching. So he was in prison for 12 years, which is when he wrote Pilgrim's Progress, The Holy War, and other works. We came out of that context where the government got to mandate how worship happened, and indeed even what the nature of worship should be. And here, the government is now again mandating how worship should happen and what worship is. They are. Yes, the churches have been thrown into a group of a great number of activities that are now forbidden. Granted, this is not singling out the church. So we shouldn't treat this necessarily, at this point, we should not treat this as an instance of persecution. But we need to start asking these questions. Because the fact of the matter is that our constitutional rights have been suspended. That is not in question. Now, the explanation that's being given is that we have a virus out there that we're trying to stop. But I want you to ask the question, is it really just the case that the government can simply stop all of this and point to a boogeyman, right? There's a boogeyman. And because of that boogeyman, we need to, here's how worship is going to be done or not done. Ask yourself that question. You know, the Church of England and its relationship with the crown in the 17th century had their reasons for forbidding certain types of groups from gathering together. And they had the reasons for forbidding certain people from preaching certain things. And the reasoning, right? We often look back at England and we say, oh, the king was just so evil, and Parliament was wicked, and this in-bed relationship between the English government and the church was immoral. And we look back at all that and we say, that's terrible. How could they possibly do something like that? But do you think that the king's reason was because he hated Christians? No, it wasn't. It wasn't. Remember, the king was Christian. All right? So it wasn't that he hated Christians. Right? There were reasons given along the lines of maintaining order. If we have all of these people out there not teaching in accordance with the Church of England, but teaching different things which could potentially fracture the religious situation in our country, then we are setting ourselves up for failure. I mean, wouldn't it be more loving and more careful for the general populace to only have one church called the Church of England, one teaching, and a certain group of people who are allowed to administrate that teaching. Wouldn't that be safer? Wouldn't that be more orderly? Because if we don't do it that way, there will be chaos. The sentiment behind the Roman Catholic Church, and as it regards Luther's desire to translate the scriptures into German, was the same. If right, they had a good reason, right? It was a moral reason, actually. It was a legitimate concern. If we allow this monk and several other people, like who went before him, Wycliffe and Tyndale and others, if we allow these people to translate the Vulgate into the common tongue, you're going to have a kaleidoscope, right? Worth of different interpretations. You're going to have a fracturing of the meaning, of the unified meaning of the Holy Scriptures. Luther's response was like, yeah, but I don't care because I believe God works through this, and he works all things to our good anyway for those who love him. And the benefits of having the Scriptures in the common tongue outweigh that con, right? The pros outweigh that con. And so he went ahead. And that's how many Bible translators of the 16th century, 15th century saw it, right? It is better to have the Word of God in the common tongue than to worry about the cares of the Roman Catholic Church and what they're concerned about. That's a worldly concern. There's always a reason, and it's usually a good reason. There's always let me reframe. There's always a good reason behind the suspension of rights and liberties. Always. We look back in the past and we turn the people who have done so in the past, who have suspended rights and liberties for certain groups of people, and we demonize them. And I think in our anachronistic mindset, we look back and we think, it must have just been such dark days and evil. It was like Satan himself was working through that man or men or whatever. It wasn't like that, though. Everything, all the bad decisions that have been made ever have been made because someone thought they were moral or right or needful or necessary. Even Hitler was giving economic reasoning behind his persecution of the Jewish people, right? So which is why he was able to stir up such a great number of his population to be on his side, was because he was taking sentiments that had been present in the population for a great many years, and now he's directing the anger and the frustration that had arisen from those sentiments, and he's directing it to a certain group of people. And so he's mixing his tyranny with truth. There were real concerns. There were real political disputes. There were real economic troubles. All of these things were real. Now, the lie came into play when it came to what the cause of all those things were. And here, I don't think we're dealing with a much different situation. We're dealing with a situation where there's an excuse, and there's always an excuse, brothers and sisters. There's always an excuse to take rights away. Always. And it's usually a good one. So the question becomes, do the pros outweigh the cons? Do the cons outweigh the pros? Right? Is this liberty worth giving up? That's the question you have to ask yourself. The other thing is, I bring this to the table for perspective. When a year ago, I would get on a place like Facebook, and over half my friends on there are cynical and critical of moves of government. All the time. It's one of the main. If you were to divide the subjects of conversation up into a pie chart, it would definitely be at least at half or a little more than that of the topics, right? It would be politics. It would be government. It would be libertarianism versus conservatism, or the Constitutional Party versus the Libertarian Party, or the non-aggression principle versus government overreach, things like that, right? And the people who have time and time and time and time and time again, the same people who have been cynical and critical of government for multiple years, are now the same people that are coming out and saying the government knows what it's doing and it has your best interest in mind. I do not understand that. The only way I can explain that is cowardice. It's cowardice, right? Or it's an honest change in position. But when you come out and you say that the suspension of all of these liberties that you've said in the past you would go to blows for are now suspended because of a virus you most likely don't have any personal experience with, you probably don't even know a person that has this virus, you're willing to give the government all of this because of the excuse they're giving. Which goes to show that you'd probably give it all away, given any excuse. They would always use an excuse. It's always going to be for the public good. It's always going to be for the ordering of society. That's always going to be the excuse. So the fact that you would just that a great many of people would just mindlessly hand over their rights without asking any questions, and that these same people that were the ones talking all tough months ago against not only Trump, but the potential candidates, Democratic candidates, these same people that are now, government's doing everything in our best interest. We're characterizing and poking fun at the Democratic candidates months ago. But now all of a sudden they're taking care of everything. Now all of a sudden they have their heads screwed on right. Now all of a sudden they're doing things in the good of the public interest, right? Or for the good of the public. I don't understand that. I really don't. There has been such a pendulum swing, and it's like, the same people that are suggesting, don't panic. Don't worry about this. Don't fear. A great number of them are the same ones that were fear-mongering just months ago about the Democratic candidates. Some of them are people who would criticize Trump for the way he's overreached and for the verbiage that he's used. These are people who have gotten mad at Trump for using bad words, and now they're not even upset at their governors or their city politicians for suspending the constitutional right of assembly. So you can't use a potty mouth, but you can take away almost every constitutional right of the American citizen. So now, again, I'm not denying that the government has some role to play here, a major one. But we cannot just we cannot just be silent in how the government goes about doing that, right? The public needs to be a big player in how we proceed. And right now, the public is not being a big player in how the government proceeds. It is just saying, okay, we'll do whatever you say, right? There's no thought going into this. None. Government has to be involved in some way. There has to be some kind of role that they play here in maintaining the order, in showing benevolence toward its citizens, and so on and so forth. The public has a role to play as well. I appreciate the fact that Trump has at this point only really made recommendations, and he has expected state and local authorities to follow those recommendations. So I do appreciate that. I also appreciate that a great many governors are doing the same. There's a lot of governors, like the governor of Missouri here, has really been prone to only make suggestions, and then it's been the mayors of cities that have went ahead and made those things laws, essentially. So I do appreciate that what's happening there. But the fact that there is even a debate as to the public's involvement in this situation is concerning to me. It's not surprising, but it's concerning, right? And so, to tie this back into what I've already said, it does go back to a collectivist and individualist mindset at the end of the day. We're just finding out who really has a collectivist mindset, right? Who has talked like they didn't have a collectivist mindset, but now you see that they really do. Because months ago, it wasn't right for Trump to have a potty mouth. But now that the government has the boogeyman COVID-19 virus, it's okay for them to take away like 90% of our liberties, right? It's just, I mean, correct me if I'm wrong. Leave a comment, right? But that seems to be what's going on, right? And now you're having churches that cannot meet legally. They cannot meet legally. And you're talking about churches that don't have anyone in their congregation who is sick with the COVID-19. And these are churches that are telling their congregations, if you feel sick, stay at home. Don't come. Stream the service online. But if you don't feel sick, and if you don't think you've had contact with the person who has COVID-19, come on in, right? We're going to worship the Lord Jesus Christ as we're commanded to do in places like Hebrews 10:25. But like in Gainesville, Florida, for example, if you had a pastor do that, that pastor would be arrested. That pastor would be arrested and prosecuted as a criminal. I will read you the order. Here it is. As city manager for the city of Gainesville, Florida, pursuant to the authority vested in me by City of Gainesville Declaration of Pandemic Emergency, Executive Order Number 2020-01, dated March 16, 2020, and effective through 11:59 p.m. on March 23rd, 2020. I hereby order and promulgate the following emergency measures, which will be implemented in response to the declaration of pandemic emergency. All non-essential places of public assembly defined below, indoor and outdoor, will be limited in occupancy to 50 individuals, or 50% of permitted occupancy load, whichever is less. The term non-essential place of public assembly means any place, indoor or outdoor, where people gather for deliberation, worship, entertainment, eating, drinking, amusement, awaiting transportation, or similar uses, but shall exclude the following, which are considered essential: pharmacies, grocery stores, convenience stores, private offices, banks, hotel, hospitals, medical service providers, medical supply stores, hardware stores, gasoline service stations, automotive supply/repair centers, airports, and bus stations. Other essential places of public assembly not specifically listed may be excluded by the city manager. 2. All non-essential places of public assembly that serve food and or beverages for consumption on premises may only be open to the public between the hours of 6 a.m. and 9 p.m. daily and shall be limited to service at tables with hand sanitizer on each table. Seating at bars is prohibited. Individuals shall not be permitted to be served or consume food and/or beverages while standing. These restrictions do not apply to takeout and or delivery services. This emergency directive shall be effective commencing at 12 o'clock p.m. on March 17, 2020, and shall continue until rescinded in writing. Any violation of these emergency measures shall subject the violator to arrest and criminal prosecution pursuant of Section 252.50 Florida statutes. Additionally, the city will direct any establishment to cease and desist operations that are in violation of this emergency directive. That, my friends, is what it looks like for the government to perform a power grab. Now, again, the reason I came on to do this video is to clarify my stance and to also try to edify others in trying to simplify the debate. So how am I doing that? My stance is this, and it's axiomatic at this point for me. There's a virus, right? COVID-19. It really exists, and it's a real concern. It's a real concern. I think yesterday we had 5,000 cases. Today, within the span of 24 hours, we've had an expanse of that number up to 2,000 in additional. So now we have a total of about 7,000 cases plus. We have over 100 deaths. This is going to keep going. It is exponential growth. There's a real concern when it comes to COVID-19. So there's a real virus. I don't think the virus was. I don't want to get into the conspiracy theories that the virus was invented by government, is all for the election and all that. You know, it's not. I don't think that's the case. This is an international issue. There's a real virus, but there's a real government, and there are real motives. Right, that government has when authorities are trying to find a murder, they're not listening to people's stories so much as they're trying to discern who had what motives. Right, so let's say a husband kills his wife, and his wife had $1 million life insurance policy that would be awarded to her husband upon her death. Right? It doesn't matter what the husband says. The husband had a motive. There's going to be an investigation. He's going to be investigated. And I think the public should treat the government in largely the same way. The government central authority always has a motive to become more central, right? I mean, there's power, there's money, there's all sorts of things that motivate governments around the world to do that kind of thing. And so to just say government knows best, they're looking out for our good, is very naive, because they're not. Central government is never looking out for public interest. If that's what they say they're looking out for, you have to ask how they're defining that. What is public interest in their eyes? Because like for some communistic governments, public interest is wealth redistribution and government ownership of the means of production. Right. In a socialistic nation, you might have just governmental control of the means of production, which is seen as a common good, and also wealth redistribution. Right. So you have some differences and some nuances there. Either way, these countries don't do what they do because they're thinking that they're evil and they're wanting to be evil. They're doing what they do because they think it is the common good. And if they don't think it's common good, and they're just wicked, evil villains like you see in comic books and superhero movies, right? Then they're hiding all that because their ploy, their marketing is always under the banner of the common good, of the general interest of the public. And so to just go along with these edicts that are being issued across the country without any question, just because they have an excuse like COVID-19, is naive. We are thinking people. Christians are thinking individuals. We all have the Christ living in us through his Spirit. We have access to his wisdom and knowledge in his word. We have every tool imaginable to be able to think through these issues and to be able to think think about how we're going to answer the question, how are you going to love God with all your heart, mind, soul, and strength? And how are you going to love your neighbor? We need to be asking that question, those questions, before we just put all of our eggs in the government basket, right? Anyways, guys, if you enjoyed this, please like the episode. Give me a thumbs up. If you didn't, give me a thumbs down and let me know why in the comments section below. Please subscribe to the channel if you haven't already, and share if this was edifying or enlightening at all. God bless.